Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Sustainable Activism webinar. This is a program of In Defense of Animals. It's part of our Sustainable Activism campaign, which is an effort to provide emotional support for animal activists and folks who care about animals and care for them as well. My name is Lisa Levinson, and I am the director of the campaign, and I'm also going to be hosting the webinar today, and I will be the tech person involved. So if you have any issues regarding hearing or seeing our speaker, please let me know. You can let me know in the chat box, and if you're on the phone, we will be shifting from our listen-only mode into more of a Q&A mode where we can have interaction with people on the phone and also via the chat box. So we're looking forward to that. And we're really delighted today. We've got Dr. Casey Taft with us, and he's going to be presenting on motivational methods for vegan advocacy, which includes animal advocacy in general. So we're delighted to have him with us today. And a couple quick announcements. Many of you may be aware that the National Animal Rights Conference is happening right now, and In Defense of Animals is there. We're one of the sponsors of this conference, and we also have a booth. So if you're at the conference, please stop by and visit our booth, our Sustainable Activism booth. We're offering free activist support sessions there, and part of this effort is also to provide ongoing support for activists. So later this month, on July 28th, we're going to continue the conversation that we start tonight with Dr. Taft. We'll continue it in our animal activist online support group. And that's a great opportunity to just talk amongst ourselves as activists about things that we're facing and different ways to offer community support, community care. And we do have a Facebook page as well that goes along with that group, and I'll try to post those links in the chat box as we get started. So you're welcome to join that, and it's just a nice way to keep the community in contact in between these webinars. And please, again, stop by and see us if you're at the conference. We'd love to meet you in person. And I think without any further ado, one little announcement for our next week, we have a vegan spirituality online gathering, and the speaker there is going to be Carrie Bagnall. She's the director and founder of Jungle Friends Primate Sanctuary. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, you can join us next week. But this week, we're going to be speaking with Dr. Taft. So I'm going to share a little bit more about him. Dr. Casey Taft is a professor of psychiatry at Boston University School of Medicine. He's an internationally recognized researcher in the area of violence prevention and winner of prestigious awards for his work from the International Society for Traumatic Stress Studies, the Institute on Violence, Abuse, and Trauma, and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. He's developed the only domestic violence prevention programs demonstrated effective for military populations via randomized controlled trials and has been assisting in implementing them across the Veterans Health Administration system and within the Department of Defense. He has consulted with the United Nations on preventing violence and abuse globally, has published over 100 journal articles, book chapters, and scientific reports, and is the author of the upcoming American Psychological Association book, Trauma-Informed Treatment and Prevention of Intimate Partner Violence. He is also co-owner of Vegan Publishers, a vegan-themed publishing company, and sees the prevention of violence towards non-human animals as a natural extension of his interpersonal violence work. His most recent book, Motivational Methods for Vegan Advocacy, applies behavior change models to vegan activism. And that's actually why we have invited Dr. Taft here today. We're so excited to hear more about this. Thanks for joining us, Casey. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm sorry you had to read such a long bio. If I knew you were going to read that whole thing, I would have sent you something shorter.
Oh, that's okay. It's good for people to know so they can make the connections of all of this amazing work you've done related to violence prevention. I was super impressed with all of that.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And thanks to everybody for joining us. I know it's kind of a tough time slot with the Animal Rights Conference and also with kind of all the racist killings we've been seeing in the news the last few days. It's really hard for for all of us, I think, to really kind of focus, and kind of, really think about anything else. So I appreciate those of you who were able to make it and join us tonight. So I think we have some slides. Do I click on
Yes.
those? Okay.
No, I'll go ahead and get this for you.
Okay.
And let's see this here. Give just a second. We'll pull them up. Great. So for those of you who are online, there is a download link to the presentation that you can click on and download if you'd like. And at this point, I'm going to take my webcam off so we can focus on Casey and really hear what he has to say. Also, for those people who want to, or if you're on the computer with us, if you hover your clicker there over the upper right corner of the PowerPoint that you're seeing right now, you can actually click there to make it much larger. It can go into a full screen mode. And then if you, again, click that same location, once it's in the full screen mode, it will minimize again, and then you can see Casey. But we have this great opportunity to be able to see him and also to review the slides at the same time. So thanks so much. I'm going to pop off the webcam now, and Casey can take it over.
It sounds like, Lisa, some folks are saying that it's a little bit choppy on their end. I don't know if there's anything we can do about that, but
okay.
Can folks hear us okay now? Okay. All right. How about all right? Well, I will get started. So, like Lisa was saying, my background in my day job is focused on preventing intimate partner violence. So this is something I've been working on for quite a while, and over the past 8 to 10 years or so, I've been developing programs to prevent intimate partner violence and doing randomized controlled trials to examine their effectiveness. So recently, actually, in the last couple of years, we've completed all of our studies, these randomized controlled trials. And here we have for this slide is kind of the abstract that we are just now publishing in the Journal of Clinical Psychiatry, where we've showed that our program to prevent partner violence and work with perpetrators and end partner violence that's ongoing was actually effective. And these are the first programs that have been shown to be effective to end and prevent intimate partner violence. So we're super excited about it. And this is the cover of the book that we just published through the American Psychological Association, looking at trauma-informed treatment and prevention of intimate partner violence. And we are now in the process of implementing these anti-violence programs across the VA healthcare system. So we're super excited about this. And this is really kind of where my focus has been for a long time. And it's really within the past 5 years or so where I've really become, a truly, a vegan advocate and activist, and have kind of been able to I've been trying to kind of merge these two areas together: advocacy, vegan advocacy, and my other anti-violence work. And the reason I wrote this book, Motivational Methods for Vegan Advocacy, is because I really think that how we help promote change has a lot of similarities regardless of the problem that we're talking about. So a lot of folks will tell me, well, that's great, that you do this anti-violence work and that you have, you've done research to show that it works, et cetera, and you have ideas about how to promote change, but that doesn't really apply to animal advocacy in any way. And I would argue that as a psychologist, that kind of the processes of change and the rules for promoting change are pretty much invariant regardless of the population and the kinds of behaviors we're talking about. So as a psychologist, there are kind of certain overarching processes that are especially important for bringing about change. And I'm going to talk about each of these. The first is to develop really clear goals about what we're shooting for. So whether we're talking about preventing intimate partner violence, whether we're talking about treating a substance abuse problem, or whether we're helping people go vegan, we have to be really clear about what that end goal is that we hope to achieve. And I'm going to argue that we should be promoting that vegan end goal because it's the clearest goal. it's the most just goal that we could be selecting when we're working with folks. We also have to consider relationships with other people. So this is true in, when I'm doing therapy with a violent individual, or whether I'm engaging in animal advocacy and I'm trying to, encourage somebody to go vegan. The stronger our relationships with folks, the more likely they are going to be to kind of join with us and want to change in the direction we're trying to help them change. We have to deal with motivational issues across a range of different problems. We know motivation is a big issue when we're engaging in vegan advocacy. Not everybody we talk to is going to want to go vegan right away. We're going to have a lot of resistance to that. And there have been models and intervention approaches that have been developed to deal with these very issues across a range of other populations. So in the the anti-violence work that I do, working with domestically violent men, and also in animal advocacy, dealing with people who are at all different kind of stages in terms of their readiness for changing. And then regardless of the problem, when somebody decides they want to change a behavior, we have to give them whatever tools might be necessary to help them get there. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more as well. So it's not just about increasing motivation, but also when that person is ready to make the change, how we can help them make that change that they want to make. So a question that I've thought a lot about, and I'm sure pretty much all of you have thought a lot about, is how do we help others go vegan? And the reason that I pose this question, how do we help others go vegan, rather than how do we help others reduce, reduce their animal consumption? Well, there are a few main reasons. First, the obvious social justice dimensions of the issue. We can't ignore the fact that we needlessly kill over 1 trillion non-human animals every year, and we use them in all different kinds of ways, not only, killing them to eat their flesh, but we exploit them in all different kinds of ways, for clothes, for entertainment, for for research, etc. So only veganism really focuses on all areas of animal exploitation. It covers the social justice dimensions of the issue, where veganism is really about social justice, about the fact that we have no need to be doing this to animals at all. And veganism is really about minimizing the harm we do to non-human animals. Veganism, as I mentioned, also offers this clear goal, which I'm going to talk about next. So there's really no other end goal that's as clear and as promoting that vegan end goal. And finally, there's no evidence at all that advocating for animal use reduction is actually effective. And this is something that I think is an important point, because a lot of folks have this idea that just asking people to cut down on using animals, to cut down on eating meat, has been shown to be more effective, or does more, it helps with reducing harm more than asking people to go vegan. But there actually have been no such studies that show such a thing. And in fact, the handful of available studies on this topic, the data seem to suggest sort of the opposite, that the more we promote veganism, the more that we talk about the ethics of our animal use, the more likely people are to remain vegan. And I also just want to be clear that what I'm saying to you today is not based on research in animal advocacy, because really there haven't been any randomized control trials showing that any one approach is any more effective than anything else. And there has been some research that's covering specific aspects of animal advocacy, for example, whether the use of graphic imagery is a good idea and that sort of thing. But there really haven't been any randomized control trials that focus on big picture issues, like should we be promoting veganism or not? There's a lot of reasons, and I've written about this in the book and elsewhere, why I think promoting veganism would naturally be more effective than anything less than that. That said, what I am talking about today is based on my own opinion. There are literatures and theories that have been developed in the area of clinical psychology that I apply to animal advocacy, and that's largely what my book is about. I think the rules of change and promoting change really apply across a range of different groups. So I have every reason to think that what we know as psychologists also applies to vegan advocacy and helping people go vegan. But I'm not here claiming that I have the most effective methods that's based on research and animal advocacy, because that doesn't exist. So basically, I'm giving you my opinion, just like anybody who's talking about their views on effective animal advocacy is doing. So when anybody tells you that they know the single most, correct approach that's somehow based on science or evidence, you should just know that that's actually not true. That either they're lying, or they're misrepresenting the data, or they don't necessarily know better, because unfortunately a lot of these messages get out there in the media, that about research studies that really are not, that really do not show what folks are claiming them to show. So in thinking about how to help people go vegan, I think it's really helpful to think about, why do people remain non-vegan? I mean, there's so much information out there these days about what we do to animals and the harm we inflict upon them. Anybody, with Facebook can readily see this, and it's really everywhere if anybody wants to know. So there's really no reason why anybody should not know about what the harm we do to non-human animals. So why do folks remain non-vegan? I think this is really important for us to think about, because we're going to be better able to reach non-vegans if we have some kind of understanding of what gets in the way for them. What are the barriers for them? And if we can listen to them when they talk about these barriers, and we can kind of help bring them out into the open, we're going to be much more likely to help overcome these barriers. So it's helpful to think about this. First, and I think probably most importantly, it's really difficult for most non-vegans to come to grips with their participation in the exploitation of animals. So it's difficult for them to kind of wrap their heads around the idea that when they consume animals in its various forms, that they're directly contributing to harm towards non-human animals. And when folks begin to develop some kind of awareness of this, oftentimes what happens is that they will have a shame response. And this is a response that I'm sure pretty much all of you have seen before, when really all we have to do is just mention to another person that, we're vegan. And then all of a sudden that other person will start to talk about, well, I don't eat meat that much, or I'm really trying to cut down, or I used to be a vegetarian. You get these really defensive responses. And I think that defensiveness is coming from kind of a shame response. So I think that's a big part of it. And I think however we communicate with folks, so we're not trying to invoke that shame response, will really help our advocacy and help make sure that the discussions don't get shut down. Because what I found, the more aggressive our approach is, the more likely the other person is going to have that shame response and sort of kind of shut down and end the conversation there. So that's why I argue for speaking with others and advocating in a more assertive way, where we're really clear about our stance for non-human animals, but we're doing it in a way where we're not increasing that likelihood of a shame response. There's also veganism myths and socialization. So another thing that obviously gets in the way of folks going vegan is that they've kind of grown up with the idea of that using animals is a normal thing. It's part of everyday life, and it's something that it's so ingrained in kind of all of our social institutions that it's a difficult thing for a lot of folks to sort of unlearn and to develop awareness of this. And also the veganism myths, which, or vegan myths, or myths about veganism. For those of us who are vegan, we recognize that many of these myths are completely absurd. The idea, for example, that, we have canine teeth, and that means that we're supposed to be eating animals, or the fact that, that other animals eat animals, and that's justification for us eating animals as well. Or that, if we don't get enough protein, we don't get enough protein on a vegan diet, and we're, going to have all kinds of health problems. There's all kinds of myths that might get in the way. So part of our role as advocates is to educate folks who may hold these myths that get in the way of them, developing greater awareness about veganism. And finally, and I think this is really an important point that a lot of vegan advocates seem to underemphasize, is that a lot of folks out there are just really struggling. So, when we tell people like veganism is easy, it may be easy for a lot of us, but for folks who are really struggling, who are dealing with all kinds of really, financial issues, interpersonal violence issues, all kinds of things that they're dealing with. For them, it might just feel like going vegan is like a bridge too far for them. And I think it's incumbent upon us as advocates to listen to them and hear their stories and hear what they're saying about what gets in the way for them. And the more that they will feel like we've heard them and that we're understanding that they feel like it's really difficult, the more likely they'll work with us to help them overcome some of these barriers, which may just be their own perceptions, but that's their own reality, and we have to talk to them about that. Okay, so let's talk about long-term goal setting. This is really important, and this is, I alluded to this already, and the importance of developing that long-term vegan end goal. There is an entire field of motivation that focuses on goal setting. And I feel like in animal advocacy in general, this literature, and a lot of the literatures that I'm talking about here, have not really been kind of brought into the animal advocacy world. So there's all kinds of research, there's theory that's been developed showing the importance of developing a really clear long-term goal. And what this research shows is that the best goals that we can set that lead to the most change are goals that are not necessarily easy to attain in the short term. So what is best, and what the theory and the research shows, is that the more clear and difficult the long-term goal is that we're setting, the more change we're going to see on the way towards that long-term goal. So just asking other people to do your best doesn't necessarily allow for self-evaluation for progress towards that goal. So just telling folks, well, okay, you can't go vegan, so why don't you just kind of do your best, or just kind of cut down. That is not necessarily the best goal that we can be setting for folks. Rather, if we talk to them about veganism, of course, they're not necessarily going to go vegan during that discussion. But if we can work with them and focus on that goal rather than their immediate behavior, we're going to be a lot more likely to help them develop that long-term goal and make progress towards that goal. I talk about in the book that I don't think we're going to trick other people into going vegan. And I don't think that we can sell veganism the same way that we would sell a car and kind of use salesmanship techniques. I think we have to appeal to people's sense of right or wrong. We have to have honest discussions with people about developing that goal. And I also think that we should not place too much emphasis on any single interaction. As a psychologist, I don't have breakthroughs with my patients every session I have with them. If I'm lucky, we have a really productive session, every so often. And we don't have breakthroughs every time. And the same thing in our animal advocacy. We can't necessarily expect that every discussion we have with somebody, they're going to make that decision to go vegan. What's more important is that we move them along and we help them think about veganism, help them think about their use of animals, try to recognize where they are in terms of their readiness to change, and help move them to that next step or that next level of readiness. So we should not place too much emphasis on any single interaction. I know this is something that I've been guilty of, where I've, for example, speaking with family members, where I'm trying to convince them of the merits of going vegan. And it can be really frustrating because they're not listening. They're not changing right there in the moment. And that's when I kind of have to take a step back and I have to say, okay, this is not productive at this point. And I need to find kind of somebody else to talk to veganism about right now, because this is all that I can do right now. And there's nothing more I can do to get this person to think about it more, to move along and move further towards change. So I want to talk about the importance of relationships in vegan advocacy. Again, I think this is really important because often what we see in animal advocacy are folks who really, really want to see change right away. And sometimes the tactics that we resort to try to bring about that change are overly aggressive. And we lose sight of the importance of developing that relationship with whoever it is we're trying to help change. And in this psychology field, in the clinical psychology field, really probably one of the strongest research findings in the whole literature is the stronger the relationship between the person who's trying to promote change and the person who we're trying to help change, the better their relationship is, the more change we're going to see. And in fact, research shows that the relationship we develop with somebody who we're trying to help change is more predictive of behavior change than the kind of approach that we take, than the kind of therapy we use or intervention that we follow. So the relationship is really important. And this was actually the subject of my doctoral dissertation, where we were the first to show that the stronger the therapeutic bond we develop with our domestically violent clients, the less domestically violent they were for months and up to a year after they left. So they continued to remain nonviolent, the stronger the relationship was that we as therapists had developed with them. So relationships are really important. And really the best way to have a positive relationship with somebody we're trying to help change is to be genuine with them, to be straightforward and clear, to show understanding and empathy while maintaining that clear anti-violence stance, to be respectful, support positive changes, and to really have that listening mindset and avoid focusing on winning. This is another kind of trap that a lot of us advocates get into, where we really want to show the other person, the non-vegan, that we're right. And we really try to convince them at all costs that, that what they're saying is not based on science, it's not based on ethics. And I'm sure all of you have had that situation occur where you spend a lot of time trying to convince them of this. And basically you're arguing with the other person, trying to show them that you're right and they're wrong. And at the end of this, you're likely to show that you're right, really, because, I mean, in terms of the arguments for and against veganism, we have the truth on our side. There's no scientific or ethical reason for using or harming animals in any way. So there's really no way that it can be justified on scientific or ethical grounds. So, most of the time we're going to win these arguments, but I think we have to be careful that we don't focus so much on winning that we end up kind of losing the person in the process. And I've seen this happen a lot, where we might show that we're right, but the other person is no closer to going vegan, maybe because they think we're, a jerk, or maybe they just think that we're not listening to what they're trying to say. So we can and we should develop relationships with folks and consider the relationship we develop really critically important, but do so in a way where we continue to promote veganism, we continue to talk about ethics. We can and we should promote veganism as the end goal, and also also develop that positive relationship. The two really go hand in hand. They are not, they are not mutually exclusive. Because I think some people feel like, if I'm too, strong with, vegan advocacy, it's going to turn people off. And I personally haven't found that at all. That when I'm open and honest with people and matter of fact about, how I feel about how it's just completely unnecessary to use non-human animals, I can do it in a really respectful way, and they listen and they understand it. So it does not mean that we're yelling at them, telling them that they're a murderer or anything else. Okay, so throughout the book, I have a number of different kind of examples, and these are things that I have encountered on our Vegan Publishers page. So I'm owner of Vegan Publishers, and I mostly run the Facebook page there. And I have email discussions with a lot of non-vegans. I'd say almost every day somebody emails me asking for help in going vegan, from looking at our page. And there are also a lot of discussions we have with non-vegans on our page. I feel like our page is a good place for interaction between vegans and non-vegans. So here's an example. Jane says, I'm a long-term vegetarian and I want to be vegan. The problem is that I feel lonely and depressed a lot, and the only time I really get out is when I go to my local diner. They make me a vegetarian dish, but they can't do vegan. And I say, that's awesome that you want to go vegan. When you're doing what you can to reduce animal cruelty, you may notice changes in how you feel overall. That may mean finding a new place to eat or eating at home. Please keep in mind that your inconvenience pales in comparison to what these killed animals go through. Jane replied in a positive way. She said, trust me, I know this. I beat myself up all the time about the fact that I haven't gone vegan yet. The thing is, I don't have any other good way of being around good people and getting support, so I think that means I can't go vegan right now. My response is, that's hard when you feel like there's no good way to get the social contact you need while going vegan. It's scary to change routines, but you may find that you actually feel better if you did, especially since you're not happy now. And her response was, you're probably right that I'll feel better if I rip off that Band-Aid and just do it. I've seen a lot of other vegans post online about how they feel a lot happier and healthier after going vegan. So this interaction, I would consider a win by itself, because Jane, first discussed how, she found it hard to be vegan. She basically said, I just can't do vegan right now. And by the end, she's saying, you're probably right that I will feel better if I rip off that Band-Aid and I just do it. So in terms of her readiness to change, during this interaction, she has moved from being kind of not really, ready to do it to having a more kind of positive view about going vegan. But the reason that I included this interaction here was to highlight the importance of relationships and the fact that the more we listen, and I try to do this with Jane here, I tried to really show that I was listening to what she was saying. I say, that's hard when you feel like there's no good way to get the social contact you need, and try to really hear her out rather than just jumping in there saying, well, that's ridiculous that you can't just find another restaurant that prepares vegan dishes, or, just bring your own food. It's really important, if we want people to want to kind of join with us and change, that they feel like we heard what they're trying to say and that we don't just dismiss it outright or engage in, kind of more aggressive name calling or that sort of thing. So this is really just to illustrate the importance of developing that relationship if we want to help people change. So I alluded to assertive vegan communication already. I want to talk about this just a little bit more, because I think this is a really important issue. And really, if there was one skill I could bestow upon every vegan advocate in the world, it would be to be assertive in our communication. So what assertive means is that we're finding that middle road between being overly passive, where we hold in all our feelings and we don't talk to anybody about our use of animals, and we just simply live by example, versus going to the other extreme and being overly aggressive, where we're engaging in more of the name calling and just the more aggressive stuff. And I'll give you some examples in a little while. To be assertive means that you're respecting the other person, but you're also not holding everything in. It allows for better listening and openness. And in general, in the family therapy and psychology fields, this is something that we teach all the time. It's really the best way to get your message across, is to be assertive with folks. So, I recommend advocating for animals clearly and unapologetically. Being overly passive may lead to less change, and overly aggressive puts others on the defensive. So when we're overly aggressive, other folks don't really want to listen to what we have to say. They're going to assume we're not really being rational because, we're kind of a raving lunatic or what have you. And they're just kind of shut down and shut us out. That said, I think that we need to be really careful not to be overly concerned about this angry vegan stereotype. And I do think this is a stereotype, this notion that vegans are overly angry or overly aggressive. From my experience, vegans are kind of the kindest, warmest people that we can know. And of course, vegans may be angry. I mean, there's a lot to be angry about when we're talking about the exploitation of non-human animals. But I have not seen, it as the average vegan on the street is not kind of screaming at people, calling them names. So I do think that's a stereotype, and I think it's a stereotype that's used to kind of silence us, just like it's been used to silence every other social justice movement. For example, the stereotype of the angry black man or the angry feminist. These are just attempts by others to silence us. And unfortunately, it really works, because probably more than anything else, when somebody reads my book or hears one of my talks, they will come to me and they'll tell me that they need to work on being more assertive, and they need to find a way to sort of find their voice as an animal advocate and speak out on behalf of animals in a more assertive way. So here is another example. Nancy says, I have a lot of respect for vegans. Good for you for showing such self-restraint. I could never do it, though. I love cheese too much. So here's an example of a passive response. Well, veganism isn't for everyone. Maybe you can just cut down on meat then. So obviously this is passive because they're not really advocating for animals in a clear way. The aggressive response. Did you know that mother cows are raped and baby cows are murdered for your precious cheese? You're beyond selfish. So aggressive because we're putting the other person on the defensive and engaging in name calling. An assertive response would be, of course you could do it. After you've been vegan for a month or so, you won't even miss animal foods. It doesn't take restraint for us to act in a way that's consistent with our values. So we're advocating for animals in a clear way here, but we're doing so in a way where we're not putting the other person down. Also, in this example of the assertive response, we are promoting their sense of self-efficacy, letting them know that they can do it, which I think is also really important. Okay, so let's talk about how to enhance motivation for a change. Again, there's an entire literature on this and a massive amount of research in clinical psychology in working with folks who are low in their readiness for change and how to get them to change their behavior. Again, our ability to influence others is not determined by how they immediately respond. So we might not necessarily see a change in their behavior right away, but we may get them to think more about the ethical implications of their animal use, which may set the stage for later change. And sometimes our discussions may tip the balance in favor of them changing, which is an awesome thing. And it's something I'm fortunate to see a lot of, where folks, on our social media pages or in emails to us will say, that's it. This has done it. I've decided I'm not using animals anymore. I'm going vegan. So that's a really awesome feeling. But that doesn't happen every time, and really any way that we can move them along in terms of their readiness and to change the behavior is a positive thing. So on this slide here, we have what's called the stages of change model. And this is a model that's been used to help people change behavior across a range of different problems. It was originally developed for alcoholics, but has been applied to those engaging in interpersonal violence and all kinds of other problems. And I also think it fits really well for vegan advocacy as well. The idea behind the stages of change model is that folks will be in different stages of readiness for change. And these are the different stages. First, there's the pre-contemplation stage. And this is, when folks are in the pre-contemplation stage, they're not even considering changing. So in this case, they're not considering going vegan. So these might be, for example, the bacon trolls we see on our social media pages, where their response to everything is bacon. Or might be the folks who are arguing that, cavemen ate meat, so I'm going to do the same thing, et cetera. So these are folks who aren't really thinking of changing. And here, just basic consciousness raising, countering some of these justifications that I mentioned earlier can be helpful. And again, avoiding those arguments, because sometimes what will happen is folks who are in pre-contemplation will sort of try to bait us into an argument so they can then kind of say, well, see, you're just an angry vegan, so I'm not going to bother talking about this anymore. So we want to avoid getting into these arguments because it's not going to solve, it's not going to help them turn vegan, and it's not going to be very productive. Then we have the contemplation stage. And this is where folks are actually considering changing. So here you might see kind of both sides of their ambivalence. And when somebody's starting to consider going vegan, it can be helpful to have a discussion, an open discussion of ethics. We really want to facilitate motivational statements. Any statement that somebody makes in favor of changing is positive behavior. So anytime we can get them to agree with us about the goals of veganism or the idea that they are interested in going vegan is a positive step in the right direction. And a question that I often ask folks is, are you interested in going vegan? I mean, it's such a simple question, but I find that when I ask this in a really clear and unapologetic way, that oftentimes folks will tell me, yes, I have considered going vegan and I just need help in doing it. Or they might say, I have thought about it, but this is what's getting in the way for me. And that could be really helpful in opening up a really important discussion about talking about what those barriers might be and how you can overcome some of those barriers. The next stage of change is the preparation phase. And here the person has made the decision, in this case, to go vegan, but they might need help in getting there. So here is where, tips for shopping or recipes may come in handy in particular. We want to be especially encouraging and hopeful when folks are at this stage. We want to, basically let them know that they can do it and kind of we're there with them, we're behind them, and that we are confident that they're able to do it. So we want to kind of build up their sense of agency. Then we have the action stage. And here is when the person is actually going vegan or gone vegan, and the maintenance stage where we want them to maintain their veganism. And I think what's especially helpful for once folks make the transition to veganism is to provide support and encouragement, to provide spaces, online and in person through meetups or Facebook groups or whatever it is, to provide an environment and a place for folks to feel like they can talk to other people who are experiencing similar things. They can talk to other vegans. They don't really feel so alone because they have this community behind them. So that's just an overview of this model that I think can really be applied to animal advocacy. Just some other considerations of the stages of change model. It's especially helpful to diagnose the stage of change where somebody is. So when we're talking to a non-vegan, think about where they are in terms of their readiness, and then try to match our approach with whatever their stage is. Different people may require different messages. Not the same message will work for everybody. So anybody who tells you that there's one single message that will work for everybody is, it's not obviously not true, because if there was one message that would work for every single person, then we would be living in a vegan world right now. So we have to figure out where that person is and what message might be most likely to reach them. Remember that we can't make others change. So again, kind of going back to the example of trying to change our family members, that we can't, at some point there's only so much that we can do, and we might need to find a more receptive audience. And finally, I think it's helpful to think of non-vegans as pre-vegans, meaning that everybody has the capacity to go vegan, and that we can be hopeful that everybody will eventually go vegan. So I like to think of folks as pre-vegans, including my own family members, because I believe that, someday they will go vegan. And, most of us were not vegan from birth. So most of us were in the same position that many of these non-vegans are in terms of their readiness for change. So I like to think of non-vegans in a hopeful way as pre-vegans, that we just need to find ways to reach them and to kind of move them along in terms of their readiness to change. So here's another scenario. Susan says, I'm not vegan, but I've read books and watched videos about how these animals are tortured. It stresses them out. But there are organic options that I do agree with. And as much as I would love to quit eating meat, it's a difficult habit to give up. And I say, it sounds like you agree with veganism, so how can we help you go vegan? If you read up on it, I'm sure you know that organic meat is also cruel to animals. And then Susan says, true, I just need to find a good place to start. My response is, we can definitely help you with that. What information would be most helpful for you to go vegan? So here we see that Susan is at the contemplation stage in terms of the stages of change. So she's displaying both sides of her ambivalence. She realizes that what we do to animals basically is torture, and it stresses them out. But on the other hand, she doesn't necessarily disagree with organic options. So she's kind of displaying both sides of her ambivalence. She's kind of going back and forth. So she's thinking about it, and she's in the contemplation stage. And here we really want to reinforce the ethical, aspects of going vegan to try to kind of tip the balance in favor of going towards the vegan side of her, kind of ways of thinking about it. And as we see by her second comment, she actually agrees that that going vegan would be something that she would want to do, and that she's almost moving to the preparation stage where she's saying, I just need to find a good place to start. So this just brief interaction here, I would consider a victory in that we've moved this person along to a place where they're closer to developing that vegan end goal, and to going vegan. So again, what somebody says or what somebody writes is behavior. And if we can move somebody along in terms of readiness for changing in any way, that's a positive step in the right direction. Just a few communication traps I want to cover, focusing on the negative. So again, this kind of goes to the point I was just making, how we want to have a more hopeful perspective. So if we have somebody who's asking us questions that strike us as kind of naive or absurd, we should assume the best and assume they just really want truthful answers to these things and that they're not trying to upset us. So really don't assume the worst in other people. Don't engage in mind reading where we feel like we know what they're thinking and we're, again, assuming the worst. Don't allow our discussions to get sidetracked. Again, I think our most powerful argument is the fact that we have no need to be using animals at all. There's no health reasons for it. It's not ethical to do it at all. So when we get sidetracked into all kinds of other discussions and arguments, it really takes us away from our strongest argument, our strongest point, and that will make us less effective as advocates. And I think I have an example of that here. This is one that we've all heard before. Joseph says, meat is food for humans and has been since the beginning of time. We're designed to eat meat. That's why we have these canines. You won't go to the jungle and lecture to a cheetah not to eat those antelopes anymore, would you? This is something we hear all the time. And this is my attempt to kind of bring it back to the central ethical issue, where I'll say, unlike cheetahs, humans have no biological need to eat other animals. It's not even healthy for us. Since it's unnecessary, it's not ethical. What matters is whether it's defensible to eat animals right now in the current time, given the immense suffering it causes to animals and the destruction it does to the planet. So again, bringing it back to the ethical argument, not getting stuck in these kind of side conversations. We can go back and forth all day about this and not really, have any resolution. And the other person is not going to be any closer to going vegan at the end of it. Lastly, I want to talk about trauma in animal advocacy. This is something that I think is really important. A lot of us advocates have become advocates due possibly to our own experiences of trauma. Maybe we ourselves have experienced unnecessary violence and abuse, or have witnessed others being abused. So we develop sensitivity and recognize the kind of social justice issues and the injustice of needless violence. And this may make some of us more prone to recognizing the social justice or the injustice of our animal use. So a lot of us have experienced trauma ourselves. We also bear witness to atrocities towards non-human animals. So we're exposed to a lot of trauma. And I think it's really important that we are aware of kind of where we're at kind of psychologically and mental health wise, and make sure that we don't go to that really dark place. We really need to take care of ourselves and know what our limits are in terms of how much trauma and abuse we can expose ourselves to. So sometimes that means that we need to kind of, unfollow, certain Facebook pages if it, constantly has really, traumatic, violent images that are really upsetting to us, and it's causing us all kinds of problems or nightmares or what have you. So it's helpful for us to recognize what our limits are, to take good care of ourselves, and to develop that supportive network. It's important to take care of ourselves, obviously, just for our own mental health, but also as animal advocates. If we want to help reach people, if we want to kind of find that little bit of kind of motivation when somebody's talking about their use of animals, we have to be able to see the good in other people. We have to be able to focus on the positive in the other person, and to recognize the little kind of the little avenues we have for reaching them. And if we have a negative outlook and we just think that everybody sucks and that humans are just all terrible, it's going to be a lot harder for us to reach other people and to connect with them and to help them change. So in closing, and then we'll take some questions, I really believe our success will be determined at the grassroots level. And that's really why I wrote this book, because I really hope that everybody goes out there and tries to advocate for animals in the best way that they know how. And I hope that this book and hope maybe even this talk will be helpful for some people in doing that. There's a huge infusion of energy going into the animal advocacy community, and I just really hope that it's directed in the right direction, and that we're promoting vegan awareness and that we're all trying to educate others and raise awareness. So we have a little bit of time left, and I think we can take some questions or comments.
Sure. Let's see. Thank you so much, Casey, for sharing the tenets of your book, and we've had such a lively conversation in the chat box about.
I know. I was trying not to read it because I was catching some of them and trying to stay.
Well, I think at this point I'll go ahead and close the presentation, and if you need to reopen it, we can always do that. And sure. Then we'll switch to what's called a Q&A mode. So everyone will hear a little announcement in just a moment.
Mm-hmm.
All attendees are muted and may unmute themselves by pressing *6.
So for those who have questions directly for Casey, you can either type them into the chat box, or you can also, if you're on the phone, you can unmute yourself by pressing *6. If you're on the computer, there is an icon of a microphone, and if you click that, it will unmute yourself. So let's see. I'm wondering if we have any questions for Casey. We have a few minutes. see. So there's a question from Christine, and she's asking if there's any research into unrecognized trauma in activists, and if it adds to anger.
That's a good question, and I'm not familiar with research on that specific issue in terms of animal advocacy. I can say, and I've done research on this myself with military veterans, that trauma and PTSD, it is a big contributor to anger and violence. PTSD is a really strong risk factor for aggressive behavior. And what happens is, and I talk about this a little bit in the book too, that when we experience trauma, we develop problems such as PTSD, we are more likely to misinterpret other people's intentions. So when we've been wronged in some way, or we've experienced trauma or been exposed to trauma, we're more likely to kind of assume the worst in other people. We're more likely to assume, for example, that somebody has negative intentions, or that they're trying to push our buttons or trying to upset us, and we're going to be more likely to respond aggressively. So I do think that when we've experienced trauma, it's helpful for us to be aware of our own reactions and to make sure that we're not that we're interpreting other people's intentions in the most appropriate way.
Thanks, Casey. Thanks for answering that. And some folks are asking where they can follow your work.
I guess the Vegan Publishers page is probably the best place. I don't have my own like Facebook page. I mean, you can follow me on my personal page if you want to, friend me there or what have you. But Vegan Publishers is really kind of where I do kind of a lot of my advocacy, not to mention producing books to help elevate the voice of other advocates to engage in advocacy. In my other world, as a violence researcher, I have a book that I recently wrote that Lisa mentioned, and other work that if folks are interested in that, feel free to message me, and I'd be happy to pass along in any of my articles or anything like that if you want to take a look.
Great, thanks, Casey.
I have a question.
Let's see, there's another. Oh, sure. Yes, please say your name.
Alexandra, and thank you so much for this presentation. It was very educational, and I realized it was so interesting because I actually had somebody last week say, "We have canines. We should be able to," and I didn't feel like I answered it properly. And I think I err on the passive side, and this presentation showed me that I err on the passive side. However, just to follow through on how to be more assertive, but to not turn people off. I have found, and I've also been trained with, I'm a health coach, so I'm trained in motivational interviewing. One of the tenets that really works well is to make sure that the person, and you did this in a lot of your conversations, but just so the other people can also hear that, it's always effective to say, well, you can do whatever you want, because when you let someone sit with their own feelings, then they don't feel like they have to fight back and defend their position. So I often find that just saying how veganism has been positive for me and what I've done, and letting it go, has been very effective. And it just lets the other person then make up their own mind. And then, just like we were kids with our parents, when they told us we could choose, we usually chose the most responsible thing.
Right. I think that's a really important point, that in any kind of, whenever we're trying to help somebody change their behavior, it's going to work a lot better if it's coming from them, if they feel like that they're arriving at it themselves. And that's another reason, to me, that's another argument against this kind of idea that we should just be asking people to cut down on using animals, because I think we should have them map out, how they're going to work towards the vegan goal. So we don't have to map out, that they should reduce this or cut down on eating this or that. We should work with them towards developing that goal and allow them to decide how they're going to work towards it on their own, where we don't have to map out the specifics of how they do it.
Yeah, I agree. And I see people in the chat box saying, how can I convince somebody? How can I? And I don't think, will you talk to that a little bit about convincing? Because of course, in the trying to convince an alcoholic to stop drinking, it's the same thing. It's the same to try and stop a meat eater who's socially acculturated to eating meat and dairy.
Right. Yeah, I know. If there was an easy way to convince, really resistant people to go vegan, definitely my whole extended family would be vegan right now. But unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, and it it has to be a process for a lot of folks. And what I've found is, the more I engage in advocacy in various areas, the less I feel like pressure to change one particular person, because there's always somebody else or some other more receptive audience that I could kind of direct my message towards and have a greater impact.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander, for asking your questions eloquently, I might add.
Hi, Casey. May I ask a question?
Sure.
Please share your name.
Excellent. It's Andrea Cladar. Thank you so much for the presentation. I've read your book, actually, and I really enjoyed it. I think it's absolutely essential reading for any advocate. One question for you in terms of, and this is sort of almost quite basic, but how do you address when people ask, or more comment than ask, when they challenge your premise that it's not necessary? Of course, there's overwhelming amount of scientific evidence to show that it's not necessary, but they go, but I knew all these vegans who got sick and I could never do that, or I have allergies, or things like that. It's just not healthy.
Right.
How do you address that? Do you challenge it directly and just provide them with scientific evidence, or do you address it in some other way?
I do. Yeah. I mean, I do kind of point them towards the scientific evidence that really, there's really no evidence that eating animals or eating dairy is healthy for us or necessary in any way. When people say they're allergic to all vegetables, like, I'm always very skeptical of that. A related one that we might hear is when they'll say, well, what about like the Inuits? Like, it's necessary for them. But like, I've never actually had these discussions with Inuits, because they're not online debating with me. So we should not kind of appropriate other people's situations, other people's struggles to try to justify using animals ourselves. So yeah, I do try to provide information, but there's only so much you can do. And what I found for a lot of these folks who describe it as kind of necessary that they eat animals, they tend to be in more the pre-contemplation stage of change, and they're not necessarily really interested in kind of talking about the ethical issues of veganism. I think for a lot of these folks, they also may have that kind of shame response kicked in. So so it does sometimes make it a challenge to present this kind of information without having kind of an aggressive response from them.
Great, thank you. We do have a couple other questions too. There's a few in the chat box. There's also someone named Grant who would like to ask a question. So hold on one second. I'm just going to get him unmuted because here we go. Grant, would you like to ask your question?
Hey, yeah, thanks for that. And thanks for the talk. It's really good to hear from you guys. So my question this time is that I do most of my advocacy online, and with my team, I strive to operate at scale as effectively as possible. And so I was actually inspired, just as an example, recently by someone who posted on the forum for the little cartoon called XKCD that maybe you guys like. And he said that just one little single panel XKCD cartoon was enough to make him go vegan. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have situations where people spend just hours and days trying to work on like one person and crack them. And sometimes you never do. And sometimes you do. But so our question is, since we want to like get somebody converted and then move on to the next one, or ideally reach a bunch of people at the same time in one or another way. I mean, everybody's different, but what would be your estimate of like the optimal level and time spent for engagement. Like if we're discussing something online with somebody and we've read a couple times, we go to our FAQ and we respond maybe 2-3 times to various objections. At what point do you want to cut somebody loose at that?
Right. I think that goes back to kind of assessing where somebody is in terms of their readiness. So making that assessment, is this person interested in changing? Are they really interested in this? Or do they just kind of want to defend using animals? And at some point, I will make the determination, okay, this is not really productive. This is not, they're just trying to have a gotcha moment. They're just trying to win the argument. So this is not really a give and take kind of discussion. Kind of related to your question is, on our vegan publishers page, what I really try to do is put out different messages that might appeal to different people. So again, there's not one single messaging approach that I think is effective or that's only effective, so you want to reach, so we do posts that are actually for vegans who have gone vegan. It's just to kind of blow off steam. It might actually be poking fun, of non-vegans a little bit, just because it's helpful for us to have a kind of supportive network. And then we'll get other people who will say, well, that's not how you convert people. And I'm thinking to myself, well, that's not really the point of this post or this meme. This is really for the vegans just to feel connected and supported. And we'll do other posts that are really to reach those who, are in the contemplation stage where it has like a really strong message. For example, we can't be animal lovers if we eat animals, kinds of messages. And, for some people, those messages really work. And I get emails all the time from people who tell me that they help them go vegan. For other people, we post stuff about the environment too. For some people that really resonates with them. I'm getting a little bit of reverb.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm just going to mute Grant.
Okay.
Sorry, Grant, I apologize for muting you. It's just so we don't get the echo.
I think I answered.
But thank you so much for answering the question. And there may be, I'm wondering if someone named Rowdy would like to ask a question.
Yes.
I can see that you're unmuted.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Hey, I've been reading your book a lot recently, so this is really special.
Awesome.
We recently threw a vegan fest in town, and we had Wayne, one of the co-founders of Direct Action Everywhere, here. And I wonder if your methods apply to their techniques. And
I knew there was going to be a DXE question at some point.
Well, and I'm torn, like I'm not sure that I'm generally, a big fan of their tactics, but sometimes I watch something about why they do what they do and I understand. And so I wonder if there's a way to mix, is it melding of the two? Because sometimes Wayne's reaction to when I brought up your book was that this was more for individual one-on-one advocacy, and he's talking about large-scale social change.
Right.
And so I wonder what you think of disruption and how your methods apply to that.
Right.
So
well, yeah. I mean, I think that's an important question. Wayne is right in a way that I focus on interpersonal persuasion, not so much on social movements. Because my book and my own advocacy, is kind of based on clinical psychology and how we can talk to people and convince people. And I do think DXE, is very good at building a community of activists and kind of bringing in a lot of young energy into the movement. So there's a lot that I really like about DXE. The only criticism I've made publicly about DXE, and I've talked to Wayne about this personally, so it's not like I'm speaking out of school or anything, is that I wish that DXE would promote veganism more than they do. So that's kind of something where they kind of portray veganism as a consumer choice, as as kind of a dietary thing, which I know a lot of most of their members consider themselves vegan, But I feel like them portraying it in that way, I think is not helpful for a lot of us out there who are trying to do vegan education. So that's been my biggest concern with them. And I've talked to them about it. But I do think, they bring a lot of positive things too. So I don't want to just focus on, on the negative.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thanks for your question. And I wanted to mention there's another question in the chat box, which is, what do you think about, or would you have a different approach with someone you only had a limited interaction with, someone you only met once or twice versus someone you had an ongoing relationship with?
That's a really good question. I sort of feel like most of my interactions, I don't know if I'm ever going to interact with that person again, on our social media pages, on our Facebook pages. And I don't know that I don't think that I necessarily talk to them any differently, and I think that's something that with time, the longer I've been an advocate, the more I'm just kind of matter of fact about my views on veganism and ethics, regardless of who I'm talking to, even if I'm at a party or a social event where, suddenly the mood in the room might change. But I don't really have any problem with talking to people about it regardless of, it's difficult. And I don't think we can put too much pressure on ourselves to make anybody go vegan with any one interaction. And that all I can do is try to figure out where they are and try to get them to think about it a little bit more and to move, increase their readiness for changing.
Thanks, Casey. And there's another little dialogue going on regarding, you had mentioned people in your family, and sometimes our family members aren't so far along in their pre-vegan status. So
right.
We're wondering what to do if, say, your partner is not vegan, but it's something so deeply a part of you and your value system.
Right. That's a good question. So we were talking about like intimate relationships, or if we're talking about a relationship partner. That's tough. I'm fortunate that my wife and I pretty much became vegan at the same time, and I was, plant-based when I met her, but not, completely vegan. And she listened to me and, saw that it was important to me that we do this together. And she did it, so I feel very fortunate that she was open to it. And I imagine that would be a difficult thing for a lot of relationships where you really care so deeply about something and your partner is not really, it's just the mere fact that they don't go vegan themselves feels invalidating to you, because if they really understood how you felt about it, they would go vegan right then and there. So that is something I don't really have a good answer for that, about how to deal with that. I think that's an individual thing that everybody needs to decide what their limits are, what they're willing to deal with, and whether they can live with it or not, whether they can accept their partner or not, given the situation. So it's really it's individual, like setting limits and boundaries. And that's not just intimate relationships, but all relationships, I know for my own family members, I struggle with this a lot because it was really upsetting to me. My family members who, I know as kind and caring and compassionate people, we're not really making the change, and at some point I had to decide, am I able to still have a relationship with them or not? And I made the decision to love them and to not reject them. But that's an individual thing, and it's different for everybody. And we have to consider our own well-being and whether it's healthy for us to be in that particular relationship. And that's something for us all to decide for ourselves.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a difficult question. And there's also that element of respect too. Does the person respect your values, even if they don't necessarily agree? And how do you navigate that on a daily basis?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a couple other things. There's been some questions about what to do with those religious arguments about the dominion, and I think you addressed that a bit in your presentation. But there was one question I also wanted just to highlight. There was actually an interesting response, which I think is really a beautiful one from Anna. She says that all we can do is apply religious principles as a guideline to be the best people we can be. And for her, she said that veganism is part of that. And I think that's an interesting perspective, rather than going back to trying to cite different, specific quotes from the Bible or verses, to actually say, well, these are the principles.
Right. And ask what would Jesus say today if he was here talking to us. I agree. I think kind of using verses from the Bible, because other people will use other verses, and then it's kind of a battle of, which excerpts you're using from the Bible. What I usually do, there's Free From Harm, which is a great page, has great information on animal advocacy. Has a page or a page called Addressing Our Most Common Justifications, something like that. Eating Animals, Addressing Our Most Common Justifications. And they have a beautiful paragraph about how to respond to the religious argument that I pretty much just copy and paste whenever somebody says something about that to me online. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the general thrust of it, that really in keeping with the, the ethics or the morals, behind different, religions and philosophies, is the idea of, doing as little harm to others as possible.
Well, thank you very much. I know there's probably lots of questions, and we can speak forever because you're providing so much helpful information. But I also want to respect your time, and I know it's getting late on the East Coast there. So is there anything that you want to say to wrap up? Anything you'd like to share?
No, just thanks so much for having me. I think this is an awesome opportunity to reach a lot of folks, and I'm looking forward to kind of videos, that may come from this that we can post online. And a lot of people don't have the ability to go to conferences or to see talks. So I think this is an awesome thing you're doing, and kind of, helping people again, like in terms of the readiness for change, for people who've made the change. You help create this community for them by providing this great resource. So thanks for doing that, and thanks for having me.
Wow. Well, thank you. I really appreciate what you shared tonight. It sounds like you have a wonderful community that you're developing online as well. And we do have, for those people who just want one-on-one assistance, we offer free counseling as part of our animal activist support line, and you can contact us. The number is 1-800-705-0425, and there's somebody, a compassionate animal advocate on the other end of the line, who's been trained in nonviolent communication, there to respond to you from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. on the West Coast. On the East Coast, it's 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. So just wanted to put that out there. If somebody has a personal question, like the one regarding what do we do if our partner's not vegan, that you can have a discussion with someone who can also be supportive and provide and strategize solutions with you too. So thank you again, Casey. This is really an amazing presentation. I think it was very well done and very well received. Just so folks know, I will go ahead and I will send everyone a replay link who registered, and I will also send a little attachment with the chat log as well. So you'll get to connect with people that way. Again, thank you all so much, and especially thanks to Casey. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and that we'll reconnect. We do this every month, and so our next one will be in August. And right now we have Tobias Lanehart slated for that slot, so we'll see if he can join us at that time. And just thank you to everyone who joined us also for what you do. Just living your lifestyle and making the choices you do, that's a huge impact, has a huge impact, and really makes a difference for the animals. So thank you very much. If you want to have a group goodbye, we can all unmute ourselves and do that. It's kind of fun to hear each other. So if you'd like to do that, feel free to do that. And again, thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. It's nice to hear you. Yay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Bye.
Good night.
You too.